A millionaire in tears visits the grave of his beloved son when he spots a beggar girl with a crying, hungry baby. When he approaches, he discovers something about the baby that freezes his heart. The poor beggar's gaze reveals such deep suffering that he is completely shocked. Before continuing with the story, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you are watching from. Your help is very important. The dawn brought a biting cold that winter morning. Emma pulled her worn coat closer to her body, her fingers stiffened by the icy wind that blew between the tombstones of the cemetery. Despite her young age, her youthful face carried marks that time should not have drawn so early, deep lines framed brown eyes that had seen more sadness than any person should endure. She walked with silent steps among the graves, the weight of 3 years living on the streets since losing her parents, making her shoulders slightly curve. In her trembling hands, a small bouquet of wildflowers gathered along the way, daisies, violets, and dandelions. They weren't expensive or special flowers, but to Emma, they were treasures, symbols of a beauty that insisted on blooming even in the most unlikely places. "Good morning, Mom. Good morning, Dad," she whispered, kneeling before the simple grave. The earth still seemed fresh to her eyes, though 3 years had passed since the accident that took her parents. "It's cold today. You would be proud. I haven't given up yet." Emma arranged the flowers in a small glass jar that she kept hidden behind the headstone. It was her personal routine, her way of keeping alive the last thread that connected her to a normal life. While other young people her age worried about studies and friends, she fought daily for a piece of bread, for temporary shelter, for keeping her dignity intact in a world that insisted on trying to steal it. "I got a temporary job yesterday," she continued, as if her parents could hear her. "I cleaned the bakery after closing. Mr. Johnson let me sleep in the storeroom and gave me warm bread." A small smile crossed her chapped lips. It was a good night. The silence of the cemetery was comforting to Emma. There, among the dead, she found a peace that the world of the living rarely offered her. There were no looks of pity or contempt, nor the constant surveillance of store security guards who treated her like a thief, even before she entered. Emma spent a few minutes in silence, her hands caressing the simple marble of the headstone, as if through that touch she could feel again the warmth of her mother's embrace. Sometimes, when she closed her eyes tightly enough, she could still remember the smell of the homemade perfume her mother used, made with lavender from the small garden they maintained. Kulum. The sun was beginning to rise on the horizon when Emma decided to take a walk around the cemetery before leaving. It was too early to face the streets, and here, at least, she was protected from the cutting wind. That's when her eyes caught a strange movement near a luxurious tomb about 20 meters ahead. Cautious, Emma approached. On the streets, she had been taught to distrust everything, to move like a shadow, to observe before being observed. The tomb was impressive. Polished black marble with gold details and a life-sized stone angel watching over the site. The name Harrison family was engraved in elegant letters. It was the kind of grave that Emma only saw in movies, the kind that made her simple concrete headstone look even more humble. But it wasn't the opulence of the tomb that made Emma hold her breath. On the marble slab, wrapped in a light blue silk blanket, was a baby. It seemed to be sleeping peacefully, its small chest rising and falling in tranquil breathing, as if that place of death were the most comfortable cradle in the world. "My God," whispered Emma, looking in all directions. There was no one in sight, no desperate mother, no remorseful father, no sign of Who could have left such a small and fragile creature there exposed to the cold of morning? Carefully, Emma approached. A white envelope was attached to the baby's blanket with a golden pin. Her hand trembled as she gently touched the envelope, fearing to wake the child. The moment her fingers touched the thick textured paper, the baby's eyes opened. Emma was paralyzed, not for fear that it would cry, but because of what she saw in its gaze. The right eye was a deep blue like the summer sky, the left bright emerald green. Heterochromia. Emma knew the term because her best friend from school, before everything crumbled, had eyes like that. It was rare, special. "Hello, little one," whispered Emma, her heart racing. The baby stared with curiosity, without crying, without fear. "Who left you here? Where is your mother?" The baby stretched a tiny hand in her direction, and Emma felt something break inside her. It was as if all the pain and loneliness of the past years found in that simple gesture a point of connection with something greater, something pure and inexplicably hopeful. Before she could make any decision, the sound of tires on the cemetery gravel alerted Emma. A large black car with darkened windows was entering through the main gate. Instinctively, Emma crouched down, using the tomb as a shield. Years of survival on the streets had taught her that expensive cars rarely brought good news for people like her. The vehicle stopped a few meters away. The driver's door opened, and a middle-aged man stepped out. He wore a gray overcoat over an impeccable dark suit. His face had deep lines of concern and something that Emma immediately recognized: pain. That man carried an invisible weight that curved his shoulders in the same way that life on the streets curved hers. With slow, measured steps, the man approached another nearby tomb. In his hands, a bouquet of white lilies, much more elegant than Emma's wildflowers. He hadn't noticed the presence of her or the baby. Emma had two options: silently flee with the baby or reveal herself to the stranger. The first option seemed safer, more consistent with everything she had learned about survival. But something about the envelope attached to the blanket made her hesitate. Perhaps it contained answers, perhaps an explanation for this inexplicable abandonment. The man knelt before the tomb and laid down the flowers. Emma could see his lips moving in a silent prayer, or perhaps in a private conversation with someone who had already departed. It was at this moment that the baby decided to make itself known, letting out a small noise, something between a sigh and a murmur. The man turned abruptly. His eyes, of an intense blue like the baby's, widened in shock. For an instant, he was paralyzed, as if seeing a ghost. Then his gaze hardened. "What are you doing?" His voice came out deep, authoritative. "Who are you? What is this baby?" Emma instinctively pressed the baby against her chest, feeling fear rise up her spine. She knew that tone well. It was the same one shopping mall security guards used before expelling her. "I didn't do anything," she responded, taking a step back. "I found him here alone. I was just checking if he was okay." "This is absurd." The man advanced, his face reddening with anger. "You expect me to believe that? This is my family's grave." It was then that Emma noticed the man had left the flowers at the tomb near where the baby was. Her stomach sank with the realization. "Sir, I swear," her voice trembled, "I come to visit my parents every week. Early this morning, when I arrived, I found this baby. There's even an envelope pinned to his blanket. Look." A blow of disgust came from the man, his finger pointing accusingly. "You think I'm a fool? A street girl appears with a mysterious baby on the exact day I come to visit my son. How much do you want? Is that it? How much are you asking to disappear?" The words hit Emma like slaps. Street girl. That's how the world had labeled her, not as a person with a history, with dreams, with dignity. Tears burned in her eyes, but she raised her chin, refusing to let them fall. I'm not a thief. Emma's voice sounded firmer than she expected. I was visiting my parents when I found the baby. Look, there's a letter. She pointed to the envelope still attached to the blanket. I haven't opened it because it's not my right, but I'm not what you think I am. The man hesitated, his eyes going from Emma's determined face to the baby in her arms. That's when the little one moved, turning his face toward the stranger. The morning light illuminated his heterochromatic eyes, and the man seemed to lose his breath. Those eyes, he murmured, all hostility evaporating from his voice, replaced by an almost reverent astonishment. One blue, one green. Emma noticed the immediate change in the man's posture from accusatory to completely disoriented in a matter of seconds. Sir? Emma ventured, confused by the transformation. The eyes, he repeated, now more to himself than to Emma. It's a Harrison mark. Rare. My grandfather had it. My son had it. With trembling hands, the man approached. Emma stood firm, though her instinct screamed for her to run. There was something in his expression now, a raw vulnerability, a painful hope that prevented her from walking away. May I see the envelope? He asked, his voice now almost a whisper. Emma nodded and, carefully so as not to disturb the baby, unfastened the envelope and handed it to the man. He opened it with fingers clumsy with haste. From inside, he withdrew a photograph and a handwritten note. The man's face paled at seeing the image. Emma managed to glimpse over his shoulder. It showed a smiling young man with features similar to those of the older man, alongside a beautiful, dark-haired woman. Both looked happy, the kind of happiness that Emma had almost forgotten existed. Nathan! The name escaped the man's lips like a prayer. With hands trembling even more violently, he unfolded the note. Emma observed his eyes scanning the written lines, saw when they filled with tears, noted the exact moment when his knees seemed to weaken. Sir, are you okay? She asked, genuinely concerned. The man raised his gaze to her, then to the baby, then back to the note. He seemed unable to process everything at once. This is Connor, he read aloud, each word seeming to cost him an immense effort. Your grandson. Jessica left us 5 days after childbirth. Take care of him, as he is all that remains of your son and the only protection against those who persecuted us. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. The already strange situation was becoming even more complex. The baby, Connor, stirred in her arms, as if sensing the tension in the air. Your grandson? Emma asked hesitantly. The man put the photo and note back in the envelope with reverent care. When he looked at Emma again, his eyes were different. There was pain there, a deep and familiar pain that Emma recognized immediately. It was the same kind of pain she saw in the mirror every morning. My name is James Harrison, he said after a long moment of silence. My son, Nathan, died 7 months ago in a car accident. Or at least, his voice failed. That's what I was told. James looked at the baby in Emma's arms, his teary eyes fixed on the little one's heterochromatic eyes. I didn't know he had a companion. I didn't know anything. Our last meeting was a fight. He slammed the door on his way out. I never saw him again. Emma didn't know what to say. Situations like that didn't come with an instruction manual, especially for someone whose daily concerns revolved around basic survival. Still, something about that broken man before her awakened a compassion that Emma thought she had lost in the harsh years on the street. I'm sorry, she offered, simple but sincere words. James seemed to compose himself slightly. He wiped away the tears with the back of his hand, a strangely inelegant gesture for someone so refined, and looked directly at Emma. "What's your name?" "Emma," she replied, adjusting the baby in her arms. "Emma Winters." "Emma?" he repeated, as if testing the name. "You said you found the baby, Connor, here this morning." She nodded. "I arrived early to visit my parents' grave. He was right here, sleeping. I didn't see who left him." James looked around as if the answer might be hidden among the headstones. His gaze fell on Emma's worn clothes, on her scuffed shoes, on the thinness of her young body. "You don't have anywhere to go, do you?" Emma stiffened, hating pity above all else. "I manage fine," she replied with a touch of pride. "I always have." James nodded, respecting her dignity. He looked at the sky that was beginning to clear more, promising a sunny day despite the cold. "I need to make some calls," he said, more to himself than to Emma. "Contact my lawyer, start the legal procedures for custody, investigate what happened to Nathan and this Jessica." James stopped, realizing he was thinking out loud. He looked again at Emma and the baby in her arms. Connor had fallen back asleep, comfortable in the protective embrace of the young woman who had found him. "Emma," said James after a moment of reflection, "I'd like to make you a proposal." Emma tensed. Proposals from strangers were rarely good news for girls alone. "It's not what you're thinking," James hastened to clarify, noticing her discomfort. "This baby, Connor, he's my grandson, the last connection I have to my son. I need to take care of him, protect him, but I don't know anything about babies. I've lived alone since my wife passed away many years ago." He paused, carefully choosing his words. "You found Connor. Somehow fate united you two even before I knew of his existence. Maybe that means something." Emma waited, confused about where this conversation was heading. "I'd like you to come with me," James finally said, "to my home, you and Connor. I can offer a safe place, food, everything you need. In exchange, I'd like you to help me with him. You seem to have a way with children, and he already seems comfortable with you." The shock must have been evident on Emma's face, because James quickly added, "You don't have to decide now. You don't have to decide ever if you don't want to. You can leave whenever you wish. But at least come with me today, until I better understand what's happening." Emma looked at the sleeping baby in her arms, so small, so vulnerable. Then at James, a rich and powerful man who minutes ago had treated her like a con artist. The proposal was tempting: a roof, food, security, but also frightening. James was a stranger, as sincere as his pain might seem. "How do I know I can trust you?" asked Emma, the frankness that the streets had taught her appearing in her voice. James seemed surprised by the direct question, but then a small smile appeared on his tired face. "You don't," he answered honestly, "just as I don't know if I can trust you." But he looked at Connor. "For him, I'm willing to risk it." Emma thought about her options. She could hand over the baby and go on her way, return to the daily struggle of the streets. It would be the safest, the most practical. A rich man like James would certainly find someone qualified to take care of his grandson. She would be just a footnote in that story. Or she could accept the proposal, take a leap of faith. For a moment, Emma closed her eyes. She felt the soft weight of the baby in her arms, heard his peaceful breathing. When she opened her eyes again, her decision was made. "I'll go with you," she said, "for Connor." James nodded, visible relief on his face. "For Connor," he agreed. As they walked to the car, Emma looked one last time at her parents' grave. A light breeze stirred the wildflowers she had placed earlier, as if it were a farewell nod, or perhaps, she thought, a gesture of approval. On the horizon, the sun finally broke through the clouds completely, bathing the cemetery in a golden light that seemed promising. Emma didn't believe much in signs. Hard life had taught her that coincidences rarely meant anything special. But at that moment, with a baby in her arms and an uncertain future ahead, she allowed herself a small moment of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this strange morning was the beginning of something new for all of them. Emma observed through the car window as they crossed the city. It was strange to be there, in the back seat of a vehicle that probably cost more than everything she had ever owned in her entire life. The baby slept peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the whirlwind of thoughts agitating the young woman's mind. The familiar streets of her daily life, with their broken sidewalks, graffiti, and street vendors, gradually gave way to wide, tree-lined avenues with mansions hidden behind high walls. It was like crossing an invisible border into a foreign country, a place where Emma never imagined she could enter. James remained silent in the driver's seat. From time to time, his eyes met Emma's in the rearview mirror. There was something in that look, not just sadness or confusion, but a constant questioning, as if he too couldn't believe the situation they found themselves in. "We're arriving," James announced, breaking the silence that had already lasted almost 20 minutes. The car turned onto a private street and approached an imposing wrought iron gate. James pressed a button on the car's panel, and the gate began to open slowly, revealing an avenue of century-old trees leading to a mansion that seemed straight out of an old movie. Emma felt her heart race. The construction was imposing, with 3 stories of walls in an ochre tone, tall windows framed by stone details, and a main entrance with elegant columns. The garden around it was meticulously maintained, with flower beds arranged in geometric designs and a marble fountain in the center of the circular path where the car stopped. "Welcome to the Harrison house," said James, turning off the engine. There was a note of bitter irony in his voice, as if he himself didn't feel entirely welcome there. Before Emma could respond, the mansion's main door opened and a middle-aged woman appeared. She wore a discreet uniform, gray skirt and white blouse, and her graying hair was pulled back in an impeccable bun. Her face, marked by expression lines, showed surprise at seeing Emma and the baby in the back seat. "Mr. James, we weren't expecting you so early," she said, approaching the car. "Martha, we have an unusual situation," replied James, getting out of the vehicle. "I need you to prepare 2 rooms immediately." The woman nodded, her curious gaze alternating between James and the occupants of the back seat. Emma felt exposed, like an exotic animal on display. Carefully, she adjusted Connor in her arms and got out of the car, her legs a bit numb. "This is Emma," James introduced with an awkward gesture. "And this is Connor, my..." He hesitated for a second. "My grandson." The shock was evident on Martha's face. Her eyes widened, and she brought a hand to her mouth to contain an exclamation. "Your grandson, sir." "It's a long story, Martha. Please prepare Nathan's room for the baby and the adjacent room for Emma." The mention of Nathan's room seemed to deeply disturb the housekeeper. She looked at James as if he had suggested something sacrilegious. "But, sir, that room has been sealed since..." "I know, Martha," James interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "I know, but it's the most appropriate for my grandson." The word grandson still seemed strange on his lips, as if he were experimenting with a new language. Martha nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation without needing further explanation. "I'll take care of everything immediately," she said, straightening her shoulders, "and I'll have a snack prepared. The young lady and the baby must be hungry." Only then did Emma realize she hadn't eaten anything since the night before. A piece of bread with butter that Mr. Johnson had given her at the bakery. Her stomach growled in response, and she felt her face flush with embarrassment. "Thank you," she murmured, not knowing exactly how to behave in that strange environment. James indicated the way with a gesture, and Emma followed him into the mansion, carrying Connor, who continued to be surprisingly calm, as if he sensed that big changes were happening. The interior of the house was even more impressive than the facade. A large entrance hall with marble floors, a crystal chandelier hanging several meters high, paintings that looked like antiques on the walls, and an elegant double staircase that curved gracefully to the second floor. Emma felt tiny in that space, displaced with her worn clothes and scuffed shoes. "You've never been in a house like this, I imagine," commented James, noticing the young woman's amazed look. "Not even in dreams," admitted Emma, honestly. A weak smile, the first Emma had seen, appeared on James's lips. Nathan used to say this house was a museum where people needed to live instead of just visiting. The mention of his son seemed to bring the shadow back to James's eyes. He turned abruptly and led Emma down a side corridor. "I'll show you where you and Connor will stay. Martha will bring food soon. After that, we need to talk." The next few hours passed in a blur for Emma. The room assigned to her was larger than any space she had ever lived in. It had a 4-poster bed, heavy velvet curtains on the windows that overlooked the side garden, a private bathroom with a bathtub that seemed like a pool to her eyes, and antique furniture that was certainly worth a fortune. The room next door, connected by a door that Martha unlocked with a key that seemed not to have been used in a long time, was clearly Nathan's former room, unlike the rest of the house, which had a traditional and somewhat formal decoration. This environment showed clear signs of belonging to a young man. There were shelves with books and small trophies, posters of bands on the wall, a desk with a computer, and leaning in a corner, a guitar that was accumulating a thin layer of dust. "Mr. James hasn't allowed us to touch anything since Mr. Nathan ... Martha didn't finish the sentence, busying herself with opening the curtains to let in the daylight. "I'll have a crib brought down from the attic. It was Mr. Nathan's when he was a baby." While Martha was taking care of the necessities, Emma tried to absorb it all. In less than 24 hours, her life had been completely turned upside down. From the solitude of the cemetery to a luxurious mansion, from cold streets to a room fit for royalty. It was too surreal to seem true. Connor woke up and began to whimper, probably hungry. Emma realized, with panic, that she had nothing to feed him. "Martha," she called, going out into the corridor. "The baby is hungry and I don't—" "I've already taken care of it," replied the housekeeper, appearing with a tray. "When Mr. James called from the car, I asked the gardener to go to the pharmacy for baby formula and some diapers." Emma felt immense relief. There was much she knew about survival on the streets, but the specific care for a newborn was beyond her experience. Martha showed her how to prepare the bottle, and with a skill that surprised even herself, Emma soon had Connor fed, changed, and sleeping again, this time in an improvised crib made with pillows, until the definitive crib arrived. That night, after a whole day of adaptation and fragmented conversations with James about how he would legally proceed to obtain custody of his grandson, Emma finally found herself alone in the luxurious room. Martha had brought her a clean nightgown, and despite the extreme tiredness, Emma couldn't feel comfortable in the huge bed. After half an hour of restlessness, she took one of the pillows and the thinnest blanket, spread them on the floor next to the improvised crib where Connor slept, and lay down there. The floor was hard but familiar. The proximity to the baby brought a strange sense of purpose that she hadn't felt in a long time. In the days that followed, a strange routine was established in the Harrison mansion. James spent most of his time in his office, making mysterious calls, receiving men in suits who looked like lawyers or executives. Occasionally, he would approach Connor's crib, observing him from a distance, as if afraid to touch him. Emma, in turn, dedicated all her time to caring for the baby. Despite her inexperience, she had a natural instinct to meet the child's needs. Martha observed with silent approval, offering advice when necessary, but clearly impressed with the young woman's dedication. On the third night, something changed. Emma had fallen asleep on the floor next to the crib, as she had done on previous nights, refusing to use the bed that seemed too big and intimidating. In her restless sleep, the recurring nightmare returned. The accident that had taken her parents, the sounds of sirens, the doctor with a grave expression saying, "I'm sorry, we did everything we could." "No, please don't take them." The cry escaped her lips before she could contain it, and Emma woke up sweaty, trembling, tears streaming down her face. Disoriented, she huddled against the wall, hugging her knees to her chest, trying to locate herself. She wasn't on the streets. She wasn't in the hospital. She was in the Harrison mansion. But the feeling of loss, of total abandonment, was as real as on the day it happened. A sound at the door made Emma look up. James was standing at the entrance to the room, wearing a robe over his pajamas, his face marked by concern. "I heard screams," he said simply. Emma quickly wiped away the tears, embarrassed by her vulnerability. "I'm sorry. It was just a nightmare. I didn't mean to wake anyone." James hesitated at the door, clearly uncomfortable, divided between the desire to offer comfort and the uncertainty about how to do it. Finally, he approached and knelt at a respectful distance. "When Nathan had nightmares," he began, his voice hoarse with contained emotion, "his mother would light a dim lamp and leave a glass of water nearby. She said the light scared away the monsters, and the water refreshed the thoughts." Emma looked at him, surprised by the awkward attempt at comfort. "Mine would tell stories about constellations," she replied in a low voice. "She said the stars were windows to other worlds, places where the people we love watch over us when they're no longer here." James nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the shared pain. "I'll bring you some water," he said, getting up. Minutes later, he returned, not just with a glass of water, but also with an old, leather-bound book. "It's an astronomy atlas," he explained, placing it on the floor near Emma. "I'm not good at telling stories like your mother, but maybe the pictures will help." The simple gesture, so unexpected, touched Emma deeply. "Thank you," she murmured, taking a sip of the water. The book was beautiful, with detailed illustrations of constellations and planets. "I never had nightmares," said James after a moment of silence. "I think because I never allowed sleep to be deep enough to dream." There was a painful confession in those words, the recognition of a life lived on the surface, avoiding diving into deeper emotions. Before Emma could respond, Connor began to whimper softly. James stood up, seeming almost relieved by the interruption of the moment of vulnerability. "Good night, Emma," he said, heading for the door. "If you need anything, Martha is in the room at the end of the corridor." "Good night, Mr. Harrison," Emma replied, already moving to attend to the baby, "and thank you for the book." The next morning, while James was in a meeting with lawyers in his office, Emma decided to explore the mansion a bit. With Connor sleeping peacefully after his bottle, she felt safe leaving him for a few minutes under Martha's attentive care. Her steps led her to the library, an impressive room with shelves that went from floor to ceiling, filled with books of all colors and sizes. In the center was a dark wood table surrounded by leather armchairs. It was a place that exuded knowledge and privilege, two things that had always been denied to Emma. Walking between the shelves, her fingers sliding gently over the spines of the books, she noticed a carved wooden box on a low shelf. Something about it caught her attention, perhaps the fact that it was the only object that wasn't a book in that section, or perhaps the thin layer of dust that indicated it wasn't touched often. Moved by curiosity, Emma opened the box. Inside, she found a set of photographs, handwritten letters, and what appeared to be a journal bound in black leather. The photos showed a young man who could only be Nathan at various times in his life, from childhood to adulthood. In several, he was alongside James, and in some, more recent ones, next to a beautiful young woman with dark hair and intense eyes. One blue, one green. The same heterochromatic eyes as Connor. He looked a lot like his father when young. Martha's voice made Emma startle. She hadn't heard the housekeeper enter the library. "I'm sorry," Emma quickly said, closing the box. "I shouldn't be messing with other people's things." "It's all right," replied Martha, approaching. "I believe that you, more than anyone, have the right to know the history of this family now." The housekeeper sat in one of the armchairs, indicating that Emma should do the same. There was something different in her posture, less formal, more human. "Nathan was brilliant," she began. "He studied medicine like his father, but had a different vision of what to do with that knowledge. James built a pharmaceutical empire. Nathan wanted to use that empire to help people who couldn't afford expensive treatments." Emma listened attentively as Martha unfolded the story of the Harrison family. James, widowed since Nathan was 5 years old, had dedicated himself obsessively to work and business expansion, leaving the raising of his son primarily in Martha's hands. Growing up in the shadow of an absent father and under the weight of expectations to continue the family legacy, Nathan had developed a social conscience that frequently put him in conflict with James. "About a year ago," continued Martha, her voice lowering to almost a whisper, "Nathan met Jessica at the university where he taught. She was a brilliant researcher working on her thesis on ethics in pharmaceutical testing. Soon, they began to collaborate professionally. And well, love naturally blossomed." Martha sighed, her eyes getting lost in memories. Nathan brought her here only twice. James was traveling on both occasions. They seemed so happy, so full of purpose, and then the problems began. According to Martha, Nathan and Jessica had discovered serious irregularities in the testing procedures of a new drug from Harrison Pharmaceuticals. Apparently, severe side effects were being deliberately omitted from reports to accelerate the product's approval. "Did Nathan confront his father?" asked Emma, involved in the narrative. "Yes, and it was the worst argument this house has ever witnessed," confirmed Martha sadly. "James denied any knowledge of the irregularities, but Nathan didn't believe him. He accused his father of prioritizing profits over human lives." James, in turn, accused Jessica of manipulating Nathan against him, of using his son to destroy everything he had built. Emma could imagine the scene, father and son, both proud, both convinced of their own truth, unable to find common ground. Nathan left that night, continued Martha, saying he would prove James's involvement in the fraud. It was the last time we saw him alive. A heavy silence fell over the library. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine. And Jessica, no one saw her after Nathan's funeral. We thought she had returned to her family or perhaps left the country. We never imagined that she was... Martha didn't complete the sentence, but the thought was clear. No one knew Jessica was pregnant with Connor. Why would she leave the baby in the cemetery? Asked Emma, trying to understand the whole situation. Why not bring him directly to James? Fear, perhaps, suggested Martha. If what Nathan suspected was true, and if his accident wasn't truly accidental, then maybe Jessica feared for her own life and for the baby's life. The conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of Connor's crying. Emma immediately got up. I need to go check on him, she said, feeling an instinctive responsibility for the little one's well-being. Of course, agreed Martha. And Emma, please don't mention this conversation to Mr. James. He's suffering enough, trying to process all this. Emma nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. While walking back to the room, her mind buzzed with the revelations. The history of the Harrison family was more complex and darker than she could have imagined, and somehow she and Connor were now part of it. Upon entering the room, she found James standing next to the improvised crib. He was observing the baby with an expression that Emma couldn't decipher, a mixture of wonder, fear, and something that could be guilt. He has her eyes, commented James without turning around. Jessica's eyes, the same heterochromia, the same intensity. He paused, but the shape of the face, the chin, that he inherited from Nathan, from me. Emma approached silently, observing the baby who was now calming down, just with the presence of both. He's beautiful, she said simply. James nodded. I'm going to do everything right this time, Emma, he promised, more to himself than to her. I'm not going to fail him like I failed Nathan. The vulnerability in his voice was palpable, and Emma felt a wave of compassion for the man who, despite all his wealth and power, seemed as lost as she was in many aspects. Days later, Emma found a set of new clothes carefully folded on her bed. They were simple pieces, but of quality: jeans, t-shirts, a light dress, a coat for the cold. Her first instinct was rejection. She didn't want charity. She didn't want to feel more indebted to James than she already was. I don't want these clothes, she declared when Martha entered the room. I don't need charity. The housekeeper smiled gently, not offended by the young woman's defensive tone. They're not bought, she explained. They belonged to James's wife when she was young. Dolores died many years ago, but he kept some of her things. They're from the time before the marriage, when she was still a simple girl, before becoming Mrs. Harrison. The revelation surprised Emma. She had never thought of James as someone who kept sentimental mementos. The idea that he had preserved his wife's clothes for decades seemed completely misaligned with the image of the cold, pragmatic businessman she had imagined. He suggested that perhaps you would prefer to wear something that had history, rather than new impersonal pieces, added Martha. He said you seem to value things with meaning, not just material value. Emma looked at the clothes again, now with different eyes. They were no longer symbols of charity or dependency, but a genuine offer of connection, albeit indirect, with the history of the family that now welcomed her. That night, When Connor woke up crying at 3 a.m., Emma automatically got up to attend to him. While she rocked him, softly singing a simple song that her mother used to sing to her, she noticed a shadow at the door. James was watching the scene, dressed in wrinkled clothes, as if he hadn't slept, seeming to hesitate between entering or remaining a silent observer. "He's fine," Emma assured. "Just hungry." James approached cautiously, as if afraid his presence might break something precious. "You have a way with him," he commented. "Where did you learn to care for babies?" Emma smiled sadly. "On the streets," she replied simply. "There were many young mothers in the shelters where I stayed. Sometimes I helped care for several babies while they rested or looked for work." She paused, watching Connor fall back asleep in her arms. "When there's no one else, we have to take care of each other." The depth of that simple statement seemed to affect James deeply. He looked at Emma with a renewed expression of respect. "Thank you," he said, after a moment of reflection, "for taking care of him, for being here." Emma nodded, not knowing how to respond. It was strange to be thanked for something she felt she should do, something that made her feel for the first time in years truly useful. "Good night, Mr. Harrison," she said softly, placing Connor back in the crib that had finally been assembled, an antique piece of dark wood that, according to Martha, had been used by generations of the Harrison family. "Good night, Emma," he replied, heading for the door. At the last moment, he stopped and turned around. "And please, just James. After all, I believe we're all trying to build some kind of family here." When he left, Emma sat on the edge of the bed she finally began to use after realizing that sleeping on the floor was causing back pains that affected her care for Connor. She looked around the luxurious room, at the antique crib, at the astronomy book that James had given her. Family. The word echoed in her mind like something both desired and feared. She had lost a family once and knew how devastating that loss could be. Opening herself to the possibility of a new connection meant becoming vulnerable again. But looking at Connor, sleeping peacefully, his tiny fingers closed into miniature fists, Emma felt something ignite inside her, a small flame of hope that she thought had been extinguished in the cold nights on the streets. Perhaps, she thought, it was possible to start again. Perhaps this strange circumstance that united her, a baby left behind and a bitter man, could somehow, unexpectedly, be the beginning of something new for all of them. With this thought, Emma finally fell asleep without nightmares for the first time in a long time. 3 weeks had passed since Emma's arrival at the Harrison mansion. Autumn was advancing, coloring the garden with golden and reddish tones, mirroring the subtle transformation occurring within those ancient walls. Connor, now almost 2 months old, was beginning to show small traces of personality. The way his heterochromatic eyes fixed intensely on people, how his little hand firmly grasped Emma's finger when she fed him. James had hired a trusted pediatrician who came regularly to the mansion to monitor the baby's development, confirming that despite the extraordinary circumstances of his birth, he was perfectly healthy. The legal procedures for Connor's definitive custody were advancing, though with the complexity expected in such an unusual situation. James used all his influence and resources to accelerate the process, while his private investigators tried to reconstruct the last months of Nathan and Jessica's lives, seeking to fully understand what had happened. For Emma, adaptation remained a daily challenge. Each meal served on fine china, each carefully ironed piece of clothing, each polite word from the staff, everything still seemed to belong to a world to which she did not belong. However, caring for Connor provided a purpose, a point of stability, amid the strangeness of her new life. That Saturday afternoon, the Harrison mansion was abuzz. James had decided to hold a charity event, something that, according to Martha, hadn't happened since the death of his wife, Dolores, 2 decades before. The housekeeper explained that the event was part of James's efforts to reintegrate Connor into society in a controlled manner, a way to present his newly discovered grandson to a select circle of trusted people before uncontrollable rumors began to spread. "I need you to be present as well," James told Emma during breakfast. "Connor is already used to you. Your presence will keep him calm." There was something unspoken in his words, an implicit request that Emma immediately understood. He also needed her there as emotional support, not just for Connor, but for himself. "I don't have anything to wear to an event like this," Emma replied, looking at the simple clothes she wore. "Martha will take care of that," James affirmed, already getting up from the table. "And Emma," he hesitated, carefully choosing his words, "I know all this is still strange for you. It's strange for me, too, but I'm trying to get it right this time." There was a genuine vulnerability in that confession that touched Emma. She nodded, acknowledging the effort James was making to rebuild something from the ruins of his losses. That afternoon, as she prepared for the event, Emma uncomfortably faced the dress that Martha had selected, an elegant piece in dark blue with a simple but sophisticated cut. "Was this Dolores's too?" she asked, touching the soft fabric. "No," replied Martha, helping her dress. "Mr. James specifically requested that we buy something new for you. He said you deserved to have something of your own, not just hand-me-downs." The unexpected gesture confused Emma. On one hand, she felt gratitude. On the other, the discomfort of receiving expensive gifts from someone who was still, in many aspects, a stranger. But she understood that the night would be difficult for James, and the least she could do was accept without protest. With the dress and new shoes, hair styled for the first time in years, and Connor perfectly dressed in her arms, Emma descended the stairs to the main hall. The environment had been transformed. Soft lights, elegant flower arrangements, waiters circulating with trays of drinks and canapes. About 30 people conversed in small groups, all dressed with the refinement that matched the setting. James, imposing in his dark suit, received Emma with a look of approval. "You look..." He paused, seeming to search for the right word. "You look very nice. Thank you for doing this." The vulnerability Emma had noticed earlier had disappeared behind a mask of social confidence, a public persona that James wore as part of his expensive suit. She realized it was his armor to face the world. As the night progressed, Emma felt increasingly out of place. People observed her with barely disguised curiosity. Some approached, asked polite questions about Connor, but she perceived the subtext of their inquiries. Who is this young woman? What is her relationship with James? Where did this child with such peculiar eyes come from? After almost an hour of forced smiles and evasive answers, Emma felt she needed air. With Connor asleep in her arms, she escaped to a distant veranda where she could finally breathe without the weight of questioning gazes. There, in the solitude of the cool night, the tears she had contained since arriving at that house finally found their way down her cheeks. They weren't tears just of social discomfort, but of everything she had lost and found in recent years. Her parents, her security, her identity, and now this strange new life that didn't seem really hers. Adults can be terribly cruel with their polite words, can't they? The female voice surprised Emma, who quickly wiped away her tears with her free hand. At the entrance to the veranda stood an elegant woman, probably in her 60s, with perfectly arranged gray hair and keen eyes that seemed to see through appearances. "I'm sorry," said Emma, embarrassed at having been found in a moment of weakness. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." "You're not disturbing anyone, dear," replied the woman, approaching. "In fact, I think I'm the one invading your moment of peace. I'm Eleanor Reynolds." The name meant nothing to Emma, but there was something in the way the woman presented herself, without pretension, without the poorly disguised curiosity of the other guests, that made her relax a bit. "Emma Winters," she responded, "and this is Connor." Eleanor's eyes fixed on the sleeping baby. There was an intensity in her gaze that made Emma instinctively hold Connor closer to her chest. "May I?" asked Eleanor, extending her hands in a gesture indicating she would like to see the baby up close. Hesitant, Emma adjusted Connor in her arms so the woman could see him better without actually handing him over. It was at this moment that Martha appeared at the veranda. "Ah, Miss Emma, I've been looking for you. Mr. James is—" The housekeeper stopped upon seeing Eleanor, a brief flash of recognition crossing her face. "Mrs. Reynolds, I didn't know you had been invited." "Old friends always find their way back, don't they, Martha?" replied Eleanor with an enigmatic smile, her eyes, however, remaining fixed on Connor. When the baby moved slightly and opened his eyes, Eleanor visibly paled. "Those eyes," she murmured, almost breathless, "blue and green, like the Harrisons." She completed in a voice that was now James's, who had appeared at the veranda entrance. His tone was cautious but not hostile. "A family trait. My grandfather had it, my son had it, and like Jessica's eyes," replied Eleanor without taking her gaze from the baby. "My daughter." The silence that followed was dense, charged with an almost palpable tension. Emma looked at James, whose face had lost all color. Martha brought her hand to her mouth, suppressing an exclamation of surprise. "Your daughter?" James's voice was just a whisper. Eleanor finally diverted her gaze from Connor to face James. There was a complex mixture of emotions in her eyes: pain, anger, relief, hope. "Yes, James. Jessica was my daughter, and I believe this baby is my grandson." The implications of that revelation were enormous. Emma felt the weight of the situation. She wasn't just a stranger caring for James's grandson. She was at the center of a family reunion, laden with history and emotion. "We need to talk," said James after a long moment, his voice recovering some firmness. "In private. Martha, please take the guests to the dining room and ask them to start dinner without me. Emma, you and Connor should be present too." Minutes later, they were all gathered in James's office, an elegant but austere environment with dark wood-paneled walls and bookshelves that reached the ceiling. Emma sat in a leather armchair, Connor still in her arms, while James and Eleanor occupied opposite positions around the large oak table. "Why did you never say you were Jessica's mother?" James asked bluntly, without preambles. "We knew each other professionally, James," Eleanor corrected. "I was just another executive on your advisory board, not a close friend. And Jessica, well, she always wanted to make her own way, without using my name or connections." The revelation surprised Emma. So Eleanor wasn't just any guest, but someone from James's professional circle. "When Jessica met Nathan at the university," continued Eleanor, "she didn't initially know who he was. When she found out, she was already in love. She asked me to keep our relationship secret, fearing that you, James, might think there was some kind of agenda behind their relationship." James passed his hand over his face, absorbing the information. "And after Nathan, after the accident, why didn't you come to me?" Eleanor's eyes darkened. "Because it wasn't an accident, James, and Jessica feared that you might be involved." The words hung in the air like a sentence. James seemed to have been physically hit, recoiling in his chair as if to distance himself from the accusation. "How can you insinuate?" he began, but Eleanor interrupted him. "Jessica discovered serious flaws in the testing of a new drug from your company," she explained, her voice now firmer. "Severe side effects that were deliberately omitted from the reports. When she confronted her superiors, she received veiled threats. She and Nathan were investigating together." James shook his head in disbelief. "This is absurd. My company follows the most rigorous ethical standards. If there were any irregularities, I would be the first to want to know." "Nathan was helping Jessica gather evidence," continued Eleanor, ignoring James's protests. "He believed that you perhaps knew, perhaps were complicit." The pain on James's face was palpable. "My own son thought I was capable of placing profits above human lives." "Is that why she left the baby in the cemetery?" Emma asked, unable to contain the question forming in her mind. "To protect him?" Eleanor looked at her with an expression of gratitude for her insight. "Exactly. Jessica survived only 5 days after giving birth. She was in hiding, afraid. She knew she was being pursued by the same people who caused Nathan's accident." "And why didn't she take the baby to you?" James asked Eleanor, her own mother. "Because I was being watched too," replied Eleanor sadly. "Jessica feared they would put me in danger, or worse, that they would use my proximity to you to access the baby. So she planned everything with the help of Father Michael from St. Cecilia's parish." "Father Michael," repeated James, the name clearly meaning something to him. "Yes, Jessica knew you visited Nathan's grave monthly. She instructed the priest to leave Connor there on the morning of your regular visit. The letter was her idea, too. Vague enough not to reveal everything, but clear enough to ensure you would protect the child." The conversation continued for hours, with Eleanor revealing everything she knew about Jessica and Nathan's discoveries, about the fear that led her daughter to hide her pregnancy, and finally about her own discreet search for her grandson, fearing to expose herself to the same dangers that had threatened her daughter. Emma observed the interaction with fascination and horror. The story was like a suspense film, except it was real, and the small being asleep in her arms was at the center of it all. "Emma," said James, finally turning his attention to the young woman who had remained silent during most of the conversation, "did you find Connor by chance or—" "Completely by chance," she assured. "I was just visiting my parents, as I do whenever I can. I had never seen this Father Michael or knew anything about this whole story." James nodded, seeming to believe her. Emma perceived that in recent days he had begun to trust her judgment, to see beyond the street girl he had initially despised. "What do we do now?" she asked, looking from James to Eleanor. The two exchanged a long look, full of unspoken meanings, shared history, and new alliances formed out of necessity. "Now," replied James, "we protect Connor and discover the truth about what happened to Nathan, to Jessica, and about who is behind all this." In the week that followed, life at the Harrison mansion took an even more extraordinary turn. With Eleanor's guidance and influence, James began having Emma attend a special school for young people who, for various reasons, had lost years of study. The official explanation provided to the administration and classmates was that Emma was a distant relative of the Harrison family who had gone through difficulties and was now under James's guardianship, while helping care for his newly discovered grandson. The reality of the classroom was a challenge comparable to surviving on the streets, only of a different nature. Emma faced curious looks, indiscreet questions, and the occasional disdain of privileged teenagers who recognized in her an intruder in their protected world. However, the astuteness and resilience developed in years of life on the streets served her well to navigate this new social territory. "How was school today?" asked James when Emma returned from her third class, finding him in the living room with Connor. "Different," she replied simply, sitting down to examine the baby. "They study things that seem to have no relation to the real world." There was frustration in her voice, but also determination. "But I'll manage. I always do." James observed her with an expression that mixed admiration and something close to regret. "You shouldn't have to manage everything alone, Emma. No one should." That same day, the private investigators hired by James made significant progress. They managed to locate Father Michael, who initially hesitated to speak, protected by the seal of confession. However, after assurances that they were trying to protect the baby and honor Jessica's last wish, the priest finally revealed crucial information. "She came to me a week before giving birth," reported the priest to James, who later shared the conversation with Emma. "She was terrified, saying they had found her, that she needed to protect the baby at all costs." The priest's revelations included two names that deeply shook James: Raymond Wells, research director at Harrison Pharmaceuticals and Nathan's godfather, and Derek Morgan, corporate security chief. Both had been treated by James as family members for decades. "It's as if everyone around me had a hidden face that I never perceived," confided James that night, after Connor had fallen asleep. He and Emma were in the corridor between their rooms, a recent habit of nighttime conversations that had developed naturally. "Maybe it's not a question of hidden faces," suggested Emma, with the direct wisdom that life had taught her. "Maybe it's that people show what we want to see." James stared at her, surprised by the depth of that observation coming from someone so young. "And what do you see when you look at me, Emma?" The question caught her off guard. "I see someone trying to fix something broken," she answered honestly. "Someone who made mistakes but wants to do the right thing now." A comfortable silence established itself between them, a mutual understanding that didn't need words. It was then that Emma noticed the half-open door further down the corridor. "What's that room?" she asked, curious. "The music room," replied James. "It was Dolores's favorite place. She gave piano lessons before we married." Moved by curiosity, Emma approached and opened the door more. The corridor light revealed an elegant room dominated by a magnificent black grand piano. Emma entered hesitantly, attracted by the instrument she had only seen in films and in expensive store windows. With cautious fingers, she touched one key, then another, enchanted by the pure sounds that emerged. "No one has played since Dolores left," said James, who had followed her to the entrance. "Nathan had lessons for a few years, but then he didn't complete the sentence. My mother played for Nathan every night," he continued after a moment. "She said music nourished the soul as much as food nourished the body." Emma withdrew her hands, suddenly aware of touching something precious, perhaps sacred. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't be messing around." "No, continue," encouraged James, surprising them both. "The silence in this house has been deafening for too long." Encouraged, Emma sat on the piano bench and began to play random notes, seeking a melody. She had never had formal lessons, but there was an old piano at the community center where she had spent some time after her parents' deaths, before her life on the streets completely deteriorated. A kind staff member had taught her some basic notes, enough to form a simple melody. James approached and sat in a nearby armchair, closing his eyes as Emma played. It wasn't a refined performance, occasional wrong notes, inconsistent rhythm, but there was a sincerity in the attempt that seemed to fill the space with something beyond mere sound. For the first time since arriving at that imposing house, Emma felt that perhaps, just perhaps, she could find a place there. Not as the street girl welcomed out of charity, not as the caretaker hired to help with the baby, but as someone who could bring life back to those oppressive walls with her simple and genuine presence. And as her inexperienced fingers found a familiar melody, a lullaby her mother used to sing, Emma realized that James wasn't the only one trying to rebuild something from ruins. She, too, was seeking in each imperfect note, in each care for Connor, in each new day at that strange mansion, to reconstruct something she had lost on the cold streets, a sense of belonging, a place to call home. "Beautiful song," murmured James, his voice soft in the silence of the room. Emma smiled timidly, continuing to play. The walls of the mansion that had previously seemed to close in on her like a golden prison now seemed to expand, breathe, welcome. It was a strange, almost forgotten sensation, the feeling of finally being safe. 6 months had passed since that cold morning at the cemetery. Winter had given way to spring, which in turn was now yielding to summer. The seasons changed, and with them, life at the Harrison Mansion was transforming in subtle but profound ways. Connor's room, once an untouched sanctuary to Nathan's memories, now had a life of its own. The walls had been painted in a shade of blue with small golden stars that James had insisted on painting himself, awkwardly, in a rare moment of abandoning his always formal posture. The old crib remained, but around it emerged carefully chosen furniture, a dresser for the baby's clothes, a comfortable armchair where Emma spent hours rocking Connor, a bookshelf with children's books that James had begun to collect, saying it's never too early to cultivate a love for reading. Connor, now 7 months old, was a smiling and curious baby. His heterochromatic eyes, the blue and the green, observed the world with an almost adult intensity, as if understanding the secrets of the adults around him. He had recently begun to crawl, to Emma's delight and James's concern, who had ordered protective gates installed on all the mansion's stairs. Emma had also changed. The defensive and distrustful street girl was gradually giving way to a more confident young woman. She continued attending school, now with impressive results that surprised even the most skeptical teachers. Her agile mind, forged in the necessity of survival, absorbed knowledge at a remarkable speed. At home, she allowed herself small gestures of belonging. A photograph of her parents, recovered from her few possessions kept in a public storage, now occupying a place of honor on her bedside table. A notebook where she drew and wrote her most intimate thoughts, resting under her pillow. As for James, the transformation was perhaps the most surprising. The cold, calculating businessman, obsessed with work, gradually gave way to a man who in the early hours of the morning could be found on the living room floor playing with Connor. The worry lines still marked his face, but now they occasionally came accompanied by a genuine smile. It was as if the presence of Connor and Emma had thawed something inside him, something that had remained hibernating since the death of his wife and later of his son. It was like they were all healing together. That August morning, James received Daniel, the private investigator he had hired to discover the truth about Nathan's death and Jessica's fate. The man, a former police officer in his 50s with graying hair and keen eyes, presented himself for the first time with concrete answers after months of investigation. "What did you find?" asked James as soon as he closed the office door, the anxiety evident in his voice. Daniel placed a folder on the desk. "Conclusive evidence, Mr. Harrison. The accident that killed your son was no accident." Despite already suspecting this since Eleanor's revelations, hearing the confirmation hit James like a physical blow. He leaned on the desk, feeling his legs weaken. "The brake system was tampered with," explained Daniel, opening the folder to show photographs and technical reports. "In a professional, almost impossible to detect manner in a standard investigation, but I gained access to the complete forensic report, and with the help of a specialist, we identified unmistakable marks of manipulation." James examined the photos, trying to process what he was seeing. The technical terms in the reports were beyond his comprehension, but the conclusions were clear. Someone had deliberately sabotaged Nathan's vehicle. "And Jessica?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "We managed to track her last days," continued Daniel. "She tried to contact regulatory authorities a few days before giving birth. We have records of calls to the Food and Drug Administration, but the calls were intercepted. They never reached their intended destination." James shook his head, anger and guilt mixing in his chest. How had he not noticed what was happening in his own company? How had he not seen the signs of danger surrounding his own son? The names that Father Michael mentioned, Raymond Wells and Derek Morgan, are they confirmed as involved? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Daniel nodded gravely. "We found suspicious bank transfers, coded communications, and more importantly, he removed another document from the folder, this internal report that was suppressed details severe side effects of the Neurofix drug, deliberately ignored so as not to delay the launch." James immediately recognized the drug. It was his company's most ambitious project in recent years, an innovative treatment for neurodegenerative diseases that promised to revolutionize the market. The development and approval had been celebrated as a great triumph of Harrison Pharmaceuticals. "My God," he murmured, feeling physically sick. "How many people may have been harmed by this drug?" "Fortunately, distribution was still in an early phase," replied Daniel. "About 200 patients in expanded tests. We have records of at least 30 cases of serious adverse effects that were classified as unrelated to the medication." Guilt hit James like an avalanche. Even if he didn't have direct knowledge of the fraud, the ultimate responsibility was his. It was his name on the company, his legacy, that had been corrupted by the greed and lack of scruples of people he had trusted as family. "I need to fix this," he said, more to himself than to Daniel. "I need to do what Nathan would have done." That afternoon, Emma decided to visit, accompanied by Connor, the new community center recently inaugurated by James. The project, which had initially caused surprise among his associates, had become a priority for the businessman, a multi-purpose space in an underprivileged neighborhood where children had access to food, complementary education, and recreational activities while their parents received professional training. Emma knew the initiative was partly James's way of honoring Nathan's memory, carrying out the type of social work his son had always advocated for. But she also suspected it was a way for him to connect with the world Emma came from, to try to better understand the universe, the streets, that, until recently, had been completely foreign to him. As she walked through the corridors of the center, with Connor comfortably settled in a stroller, Emma was surprised by a familiar face. "Emma, is it really you?" A young man about her age, thin and with a slight scar above his right eyebrow, approached hesitantly. "Alex?" she exclaimed, immediately recognizing her former street companion. "What are you doing here?" Alex smiled, showing a missing side tooth. "I work in the kitchen. 3 months already. And you?" Emma felt a mixture of joy at seeing Alex well and guilt about her own change in circumstances. Alex had been her protector in many difficult moments on the streets, sharing food when she couldn't find any, standing guard while she slept. "It's a long story," she said, not knowing where to begin explaining her current situation. "It always is," replied Alex with understanding, his eyes fixing on Connor, who was observing him with curiosity. "Is this little one yours?" "Not really," Emma hesitated. "It's a complicated story. I'm helping to take care of him." Alex nodded without pressing for more details. On the streets, one learned early to respect others' privacy, not to ask too many questions about the past or the circumstances of each person. "Hey, remember that woman who distributed medicine in Cathedral Square on Thursdays?" Alex asked suddenly, changing the subject. The memory vividly returned to Emma, a beautiful young woman, probably in her 20s, who regularly appeared with a backpack full of basic medicines and bandages, helping whoever needed it without asking questions or making judgments. "Of course I remember. She gave me antibiotics when I had that infection in my foot," Emma replied. "Why?" "I saw her talking with men in suits a few months before you disappeared from the streets," continued Alex, lowering his voice as if telling a secret. "She seemed scared. Later, she came to talk to me, asked if I'd seen you. She told me to be careful, said something about men in black cars. I thought it was strange at the time, but I soon forgot. You know how life is on the streets. Everyone has their fears, their paranoia." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "Alex, do you remember if her eyes were different? One blue and one green?" Alex's surprised expression was answer enough. "How do you know?" "Because it was Jessica," Emma replied in a whisper, looking at Connor, who was now playing with a colorful rattle, oblivious to the monumental revelation that had just occurred. The connection Emma had never imagined existed was now revealed with crystal clarity. Jessica, the brilliant researcher, Nathan's girlfriend, Eleanor's daughter, was also the anonymous young woman who for months had brought help and comfort to the homeless in the central region. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together in a surprising way. That night, upon returning to the mansion, Emma found James in the garden, sitting on a stone bench under the shade of a century-old oak tree. His face had the somber expression of someone who had just received devastating news. "James," she called, concerned, "is everything all right?" He raised his gaze, and Emma saw the shine of contained tears. "No, it's not," he answered honestly. "I discovered today, beyond any doubt, that Nathan was murdered, and that people I considered family are behind it." Emma sat next to him, adjusting Connor in her lap. With a soft voice, she shared her own discovery about Jessica and her anonymous work with the homeless. James listened in silence, and when she finished, his expression had changed. "My son and Jessica were much better people than I ever was," he said finally. "They put their lives at risk for what they believed in, while I spent decades building an empire without questioning the methods or consequences." "You're trying to do better now," offered Emma. "The community center, the investigation, caring for Connor." James shook his head. "It's too little, too late. Nathan tried to show me the right path, and I pushed him away with my arrogance." Before Emma could respond, Connor began to whimper, his little face suddenly red. When she touched his forehead, she was alarmed by the heat emanating from it. "He's burning with fever," she exclaimed. The next minutes were of controlled panic. James immediately called Connor's private pediatrician, while Emma, with a calmness forged in years of crises on the streets, bathed the baby in lukewarm water to try to lower the temperature. "The doctor is on his way, but may take at least 40 minutes, informed James, returning to the room after the phone call. His face, normally composed, now revealed pure terror. "Should we take him to the hospital?" Emma shook her head. "Let's continue trying to lower the fever here. Moving him now would only make him more stressed." The following hours were the longest in both their lives. The pediatrician finally arrived, diagnosing a common ear infection. In babies, painful but rarely dangerous when properly treated. He prescribed medication, applied the first dose, and assured them that with adequate care, Connor would recover in a few days. Throughout the night, Emma and James maintained a vigil beside the crib, taking turns to give the medication at exact times, check the temperature, offer comfort when Connor woke up crying. It was during one of these vigils, shortly after midnight, that Emma observed something extraordinary. Exhausted but determined, James held Connor in his arms when the little one started to cry. It was the first time she saw him holding his grandson properly, without the emotional distance he had always maintained. "It's okay, little one," he murmured, gently rocking the baby against his chest. "Grandpa is here. Grandpa won't let anything bad happen to you." Tears flowed freely down the face of the man who, months before, had seemed incapable of any demonstration of vulnerability. At that moment, all his defenses had crumbled, and what remained was just the pure and instinctive love of a grandfather for his grandson. "I feared I wouldn't know how to love," confessed James in a low voice, as if speaking more to himself than to Emma. "After Dolores left, I shut myself in an emotional fortress. I failed Nathan. I didn't know how to give him what he needed most. Not money or opportunities, but simply unconditional love." Emma observed the scene, feeling a deep emotion at the vulnerability of this powerful man, now reduced to the essentials of his humanity. "We're still learning," she replied, with the raw wisdom that life on the streets had taught her. "All of us are." James raised his gaze to her, silent gratitude in his tired eyes. "You have been the greatest teacher, Emma. A young woman who lost everything, but still knows how to give of herself without reservations." The words touched Emma deeply. For so long, the street girl had defined herself by her losses, by what she didn't have. Now, unexpectedly, someone had defined her by what she could offer. The night crisis united the three in a silent pact of mutual protection and care. When the sun rose, it found James asleep in the armchair, with Connor resting peacefully on his chest, and Emma curled up in a blanket on the floor beside them, like a faithful guardian. One autumn morning, as multicolored leaves danced in the garden, James called Emma to his office. His face bore the solemn expression of someone about to make an important announcement. "I've made a decision," he said, as soon as Emma sat down. "I'm going to publicly reveal everything. The fraud in my company, Nathan and Jessica's evidence, everything." Emma's eyes widened. "But your reputation, the company." "Some things are more important," James replied, a new determination in his voice. "I can't bring Nathan back, but I can honor his memory by doing what he would have done. The truth needs to come out, and those responsible need to face the consequences." Emma felt a surge of pride. The man before her was barely recognizable as the bitter, isolated figure she had met in the cemetery. James had found his moral compass again, guided by love for his grandson and respect for his son's memory. That night, As they sat on the garden bench, watching Connor play on a blanket at their feet, James handed Emma a small box. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it," he encouraged, with a gentle smile. Inside, she found legal documents, adoption papers, with her name and James's, and guardianship papers for Connor. "I want to make it official," James explained, emotion evident in his voice. "You, Connor, and I, we're a family now, if you want to be, of course." Tears filled Emma's eyes. After years of loss and loneliness, after months of uncertainty, she had found not just a home but a family. Not the one she had lost, but one forged through shared pain, mutual support, and love for a child who united their worlds. "Yes," she whispered, looking at Connor, who was babbling happily, unaware of the momentous decision being made. "Yes, I want that." A week later, James held a press conference revealing everything. The scandal was enormous, but in its wake came justice. Raymond Wells and Derek Morgan were arrested, the corrupted medication was withdrawn from the market, and Harrison Pharmaceuticals began a radical restructuring under James's new ethical leadership. The trials and media frenzy were exhausting, but through it all, the small improvised family remained united. Eleanor, now a regular presence in their lives, helped Emma navigate the complexities of her new social position, while Martha continued to be the steady foundation that kept the household running smoothly. Winter came, covering the city with a white blanket of snow. In the music room of the Harrison mansion, now bright with light and life, Emma sat at the piano, her fingers now more confidently finding the keys. Connor, now walking with wobbly steps, played at her feet, while James watched from the doorway. "I never thought I'd feel at home here again," he commented, entering the room. Emma smiled, continuing to play the lullaby her mother had taught her so long ago. "Home isn't a place," she said softly. "It's the people we share it with." James knelt, picking up Connor, who laughed with delight. Looking at Emma, at the child in his arms, at the photograph of Nathan, now prominently displayed on the piano, alongside a new picture of their unusual family, he felt a peace he hadn't known in decades. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the past like a clean slate. Inside, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, by shared pain, and by love, prepared to face whatever the future might bring. Because now they understood that sometimes the greatest miracles are born from the greatest losses. And sometimes it takes the innocent eyes of a child to teach adults how to see the world anew, with hope, with compassion, and with love. We're curious to know how far this story has reached. Where are you watching from? Comment below and share which moment in this story touched your heart the most. Your reflections not only enrich our narrative, but may also inspire others who are watching. Your perspective is valuable and could make a difference in the life of someone facing similar challenges. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and give this video a thumbs up if it moved you. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful stories of faith, hope, and redemption to audiences worldwide.